Narco-trafficking has been grabbing headlines in France these days after the recent arrest and repatriation of the fugitive French drug dealer known as The Fly, with the Justice Minister now talking up the concept of a prison for drug lords, the equivalent of 1/5 of all the cocaine seized in a year in France, uncovered in a single bus this week in the northern port city of Dunkirk. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
It was hidden in a container like this one. 10 tons of cocaine were found by French customs authorities, about a fifth of what they usually seize in a year. A record amount and the fruit of a long, painstaking investigation.
We're used to working with travel documents and processing data relating to logistics and international transport. The detection capacity that we have also enables us to detect this type of shipment.
According to French media, the drugs came from South America. In recent years, they've tended to enter France via the port of Le Havre, which is also in northern France, and where this shootout took place in April 2022 between drug smugglers and law enforcement who'd come to seize the goods. But it's a first for Dunkirk and a shock for locals.
It's
the first time they've seized this much, so it's a bit worrying.
We hear a lot about it over in Marseille and maybe in Northern Europe, but I didn't expect it here in Dunkirk.
French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau has said that France is facing a white tsunami of drugs. A total of 53.5 tons of cocaine was seized in 2024, an increase of 130% on the year before.
And for more, let's go to Vienna. Angela Mee is the Chief Research and Trend Analyst at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
Your reaction to what you just heard there from the Interior Minister calling it a white tsunami.
Yeah, definitely. I think the cocaine market globally, not only in Europe, is expanding. And we have also this year record production and that reaching more than 3,500 tons of cocaine produced in the world. And this also reflects with an increase also on the use of cocaine around the world. We have about 25 million people who use cocaine around the world. But the two main markets are concentrated in North America and in Western Europe. And in Western Europe, we have about 5.4 million cocaine users. And this is increasing. We see more people, not only more people using the cocaine, but also in Europe, more people entering treatment for cocaine use disorders. That means that it's also becoming more harmful for the people that use it.
Why this rise in consumption?
Well, it's a combination. Global markets of drugs or markets in general of drugs are always a combination between supply and demand. And what has happened for Europe about like 8 years ago is that there has been a kind of a perfect storm with new groups entering the market, so increasing competition in the markets, reducing the price, improve purity, and that has triggered also the increase in the use. On the side of the supply in Latin America, with the peace process in Colombia, has triggered actually the multiplication of groups involved in cocaine trafficking. And so the increase in production in Colombia. And now we have this perfect storm where there is more production feeding more use and more use feeding back more production.
What about COVID? Did that change this trend at all?
Yes, there has been a kind of a stop during COVID, particularly for cocaine, and not for other drugs like cannabis. But for cocaine, we saw definitely a drop in the use in Europe, but not only. But what is interesting is that after the COVID, actually the trend on increasing use went back. And in Europe, we have seen that the COVID was just, the drop during the COVID recovered very fast. But not in the US, where actually the drop in COVID mitigated a bit the use market there.
Again, this has been grabbing headlines in recent days, the big drug bust, this talk about a prison for drug kingpins, and then we saw those images after last spring where the French were shocked. A commando in Normandy at a toll booth killed 2 prison guards during helping the escape there of Mohammed Amra. Then there you see him after he was caught last week in Bucharest, Romania. The French were shocked by the seeming swagger of this drug kingpin known as the Fly by Europol. The Fly escorted by Romanian authorities back to his plane. He'd reportedly been preparing to have plastic surgery before he'd been extradited. He seemed almost defiant, Angela Mee, and we've had in this big bust, he wasn't the only one arrested. There were alleged accomplices arrested in places like Spain and across France. Is this just stuff that happens all the time, or is this a sign of the times, this particular case?
No, I think this case follow a trend that we have been seeing across the world of the cocaine trade becoming more violent. And the first that has been paid, if you want, the price of this increased competition among groups has been Ecuador, where really the homicide rate has skyrocketed in just a couple of years. And now this violence, we see it also in Europe, not only in France, but also in the Netherlands, in the ports of the Netherlands, in the ports of Belgium, because there are increasing number of groups involved, but also there are groups that are very, very violent. And compared to other drugs, cocaine is extremely profitable. All drugs are profitable, and clearly, criminal gets into the business to have higher profit, but cocaine in particularly, and that trigger also a lot more competition for territory, for the market, that now is translating in very violent violence in Europe.
More competition between gangs. Does that mean that the structures of organized crime have changed?
Well, yes, more from the typical, if you want, hierarchical mafia type groups. They have now become what we would call more business oriented. And so they are more into cells, and they organize themselves according to the services that they can provide during the trade. And so you may have groups that may help different other groups just because, for example, services import, because they control certain specific processes or certain specific geography. And so this becomes also more challenging for law enforcement, because apprehending part of the cell does not really stop the market.
And so what's the advice that the UN Office on Drugs and Crime can give to Europe's interior ministers? If you have them all in a room, what would you say to them?
Well, one is that traffickers do not see borders, and so. But the response, I think, from the Ministry of Interior, as you say, in Europe, but also around the world, we really need to increase international cooperation and trust, because often there is not trust across the police of different countries, due maybe to corruption and other things. So, but we really need international cooperation, because no country alone. This is not a problem that affects only France or only one country in Europe, but there is really the need to cooperate, to exchange intelligence, to exchange information, and to also exchange criminal proceeds, and also the cooperation in criminal justice.
And is it a problem with some of the allies of the Europeans? We've heard police complain that some of the offenders managed to go to the Gulf states, for instance, to lie low.
So that's where I'm saying it's important to increase this international cooperation. And we have at international level the tools. We have the International Convention on Drugs. We have the International Convention against Organized Crime, where there are the tools for aligning, and many countries are, virtually all countries in the world are party to this convention. And so they have also their criminal justice system equipped with certain level of penalties and criminalization of events. So now we need to work more to implement all of those implementation, and also to support countries that maybe are less, they have less capacity. I'm thinking about, for example, in Africa or in Asia, where is important also the border control, and the important to sustain and help for example, ports. You mentioned the port in France and the capacity to interdict the container. In many countries, we need to help them to increase that capacity, to first of all identify the containers that they need to review, and then the capacity of seize also the drugs, because also the drugs that reach Europe also goes through Africa.
Angela Mee of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. So many thanks for being with us from Vienna.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. There's much more to come. More news, and we'll be taking a look on how Europe rallying to Ukraine's side is being seen from Russia. Our own Elena Voloshin has been monitoring state media in Moscow. Stay with us.